Go.
Welcome back to Northwest Elite Spirit. I'm Coach Brian, and this is How to Build Courage from an excerpt from the chapter A Battle of Power from the book Journey to Ixtlan by Carlos Castaneda. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, do that now. So again, right away, Don Juan is being very practical with Carlos. He says to stick close to me because we're in an area that's unknown to you and there's no need to take chances. So though Carlos has been hanging out with Don Juan and had some experience moving around in wild places with Don Juan, this is a new place that Carlos has no idea about, and even though he's experienced, could become dangerous to him. So it only makes sense to stick close. So Don Juan tells him to stick close, tells Carlos to stick close, and Carlos asks him, what are we doing? And Don Juan says, we're here to hunt power. And Carlos asks, well, how are we going to hunt power? And Don Juan says, we don't know that yet. So basically, like they know they're there to hunt, and they have to wait for an opportunity to present itself in order for them to know what to do to capture whatever it is they're after. So an experienced hunter, when he shows up into like a new domain, he may not recognize where the opportunities lie. But since he is a hunter and he has a hunter's instinct, he can begin to recognize where these opportunities lie and capitalize on them. And Don Juan says, you know about the wind, and so you can use it for power, but you don't know about the wind and other things at certain places and at certain times. And he takes him to this place to witness this storm up in the mountains where rain and lightning and thunder and fog meet one another. And I think that's what he's referring to. Like, there's these things that happen in the world that you are unfamiliar with. And so, again, be careful, or we have to be careful. So Don Juan is telling Carlos that a hunter, let's see here, a hunter knows how to store power. And Carlos is asking, how does a hunter store power? And Don Juan is telling him that there's no real way of talking about it. I think maybe I've thought of a way of talking about how one stores power, and it's through expression of power. And Don Juan says that one must have power to get power. And so if you have something in your life that you need to speak up for, and you speak up, that is an act of power. And then through that, you begin to learn that, oh, I can be more intent on the things that I want, how I want to benefit in life. And so that power builds, and you store that feeling inside too. Like when you have something you're after, and you take that step and you go after it and you get it, there's a feeling that you get from that. And that's how you store it too. You store that feeling, and you store the knowledge that you can go get the things that you want, and that builds, and you get stronger and stronger. You get more willing to speak up. You get more willing to take action. And Don Juan is also telling him that we all do it differently. Like the reasons and the ways that I do it may not be the same as yours. So your call to power may be entirely different from his. Like Don Juan talks about it, where his call to power began with hate. He had hate for his fellow men, but he was like, but you're not like that, so that may not be how it's happening for you. And at the same time, like, imagine this: Carlos is up here in the wild with this wild man, experiencing like storm and chaos and all these weird things, but making it through, and starting to know that all these magnificent things can happen, and I can make it through, and I can be all right, right? And so his power builds and his confidence builds. And Carlos keeps arguing that it's not practical to his real life. But if you can weather a storm out in the desert or up in the mountains and have, I guess, fantastic visualizations, or a rough time, or, the times when he broke down crying, you can go through all these things up here in the mountains, be chased by a cougar. Things aren't so scary back in the real world. So you don't have to react the same way to the things going on around you. Like, you don't have to be frightened of, say, your coworker that picks on everybody. And I relate it to jiu-jitsu. I say this with jiu-jitsu, and a lot of people do. I'm not special to that. But, like, when you've had some really hard rolls and been through it, and, like, you're done at the end of the night, and you're just sitting there feeling great because you survived, like, you went through something hard, and yet you made it, and you know now that you can make it, and you'll be back, tomorrow. That's a great feeling, a great way to build personal power. So Don Juan gives him power food, and this may be somewhere where people start thinking that Don Juan's getting mystical. Power food, like, what the heck? But we all have been, like, in the power food aisle in the grocery store. We have bars, we have butters, we have oils, we have goos, we have waffles, we have bites, we have drinks, we have pre-workout and post-workout power food, and we have vegan, vegetarian, carnivore power food. And so power food isn't such a foreign idea to us, in my opinion. And Don Juan tells him to watch the wind and not to let it trip him up, or, like, push him into a ditch or anything like that, or make him tired. And that does happen when you're out in the wind. It does push you around. It does make you tired, especially if it's really whipping and you're, like, trying to fight your way through the wind, and it can push you over. Those are all things that really happen when you're out in the wind. I've been running ultras, and I'm out in the wind a lot, and the wind can be a pain in the butt. And then he talks about how he's astounded by how Don Juan gets around, like, in these areas. He says he must know the terrain, like, intimate precision or something like that. And of course he does. Like, he's up there all the time, and not only there, but he goes all over the place. Don Juan hikes all over the place, all weather, all times of year. And so he knows what he's doing out there. It might look easy to somebody who hasn't just been out there doing it. And Carlos says that actually the meet is quite invigorating. So, I don't know if it was, but if you want, you can go out personally and take some jerky or take some goos, and test them and see if they are indeed invigorating. And Carlos talks about how the trying to detect the wind and notice its shifts and stuff was, like, it was fun and it was engrossing. And he thought that he could begin to sense when the wind changed or when the wind was coming. And again, not something woo-woo or magical. Our human bodies have built-in mechanisms for sensing changes in wind, changes in temperature, changes in pressure around us. And for the most part, most of us are kind of turned off to that. And even though those signals are sparking off in our lives, we have these things that are affecting our senses, we're dull to them. We have more important things to worry about, in our opinions. We're distracted by other things outside of these forces that are expressing themselves upon us. And, again, to cut away at that mystical stuff even more, like, you have 5 senses, right? And some people even say a 6th sense. And so those are 6 levels of perception that you can use. And again, we're dull to most of those. And so in these focused states that Don Juan gets Carlos into, like even your senses about like your hunches become stronger and more accurate. So you may meet somebody and this person is displaying red flags to you, and it is your job to understand that and act according to that. Or you may think that there's something good over there. You know, you have a feeling that something good, something cool is going on over there, and so you go over there, and you receive some award or some sense of accomplishment through having gone after your hunch. And again, Carlos is very invigorated by the dry meat. He's having fun, trying to sense the wind. So much fun that he's lost track of time. And Don Juan seemed to be very good at whipping Carlos into this flow state. This flow state that we can all get into. And one of the keys to it is the ability to have fun and become lost in the doing, and that's how you enter flow state. So Don Juan is able to consistently bring Carlos to this flow state through making things fun and interesting to him. And eventually they come to like this steep incline, and Don Juan runs up the steep incline. And Carlos gives it a shot, and he makes it, but he's exhausted by the time he gets up to the top. And he comments that Don Juan must be very young, or that he'd think that man would have to be very young to be able to do that. And Don Juan says, "I'm as young as I feel that I am." And it's a matter of storing personal power. If you dissipate your personal power, you become fat and sick. But if you store power, then you'll be able to do extraordinary things like Don Juan. And so Carlos says, well, how do you store power? Well, again, through memory is one of the things. Like when you go after something and you get it, or when you even just an idea, like you're trying to figure something out and you figure that idea out, remembering the feeling. And remembering that through being intentional with your actions, that feeling will come. And so, and you keep that feeling inside and don't forget. And Carlos, or Don Juan, talks about it like a warrior never forgets these things. So if you want to be a warrior, you have to remember that feeling and hunt for it. And it's like a personal thing. He keeps telling it. Don Juan keeps telling Carlos, it's a personal thing. It's a personal thing. So what you're pouring yourself into is a personal thing. Don Juan's just showing Carlos that ways in which he can pour himself into his own thing, not telling him exactly what to pour himself into. And you have to remember that, and I have to remember that. Like, our paths with heart are personal to us. And if we can find a way to just pour ourselves into those things, the things we love and the people we love, that's what I think. And so Don Juan tells Carlos to gather up rocks nearby, as many as he can carry. And Don Juan, in about an hour, builds this little hut out of rocks and sticks and stuff. And again, that's like, if you go get a survival manual, go find a survival manual, any survival manual. The Army survival manuals are really good. They will show you how to actually build things like that. And this thing keeps them out of the wind and the rain for the most part. So Don Juan tells Carlos that he has to, since they're coming into contact with power, that Carlos has to be nonchalant and act like there's nothing out of the ordinary. And Carlos was, well, what should I do? And Don Juan suggests that he writes. And I think in that we see how Carlos put out so many books after having met Don Juan. Don Juan is having him pour his power into this writing as all these magnificent things are going on around him. And even to calm himself, he's like, what you must do is remain calm and pour yourself into your thing. And that, again, is another lesson in personal power and building and expressing personal power. And also, like, building up power. Like, these hikes that they go on are a way of that. And I can attest to that. Like, at the beginning of the hike, you feel pretty cool that you're going on a hike. And as you get up a little higher, you're feeling a little more peppy. You're feeling nice and brisk. You know, things are moving along well. At one point, you're just chugging along. And not just chugging along, but like enjoying the view, feeling the breeze, smelling all the smells. And you get to the top and you feel so awesome. You know what I mean? So that is like building that power through action, of course. And again, the only way to know about the effectiveness of action is to take action. And a while later, Carlos has a magnificent vision when lightning and rain and clouds are meeting. Carlos ends up hallucinating and having like this powerful vision, so powerful that he wakes up the next morning and he's like, I can't be in the same spot that I was last night. There's no way, because these spots are totally opposite of one another. And you'll have to go back and listen to my last video to know that story, but it's pretty intense. But while he's having the hallucinations, Don Juan tells him that the fog and the lightning are in cahoots with one another. And then wind is involved too. So wind blows in the fog, lightning's flashing in the fog, lighting it up like luminescent, like not just a thin line of lightning, but like it would diffuse equally across all of the fog. And and at times there would be a flash, and Carlos was like, oh, relief. He thought he could tell where he was at. Like, oh, okay, these things are here, these other things are there. He saw all of this stuff. Like, he used his hands to like sense around him, and he's like, okay, these are things that are here. And then he doesn't know when he falls asleep, but he falls asleep, wakes up, and none of that was real. And so now he's dealing with that, and starts calling out for Don Juan, has a bit of a panic attack and calling out from Don Juan. And Don Juan comes out laughing or giggling knowingly. And so I think maybe Don Juan knew that. I don't know anything about like what happens when fog and lightning and rain and wind meet up at this elevation, and you're surrounded by the fog, and like what it does to your mind and to your senses and all that sort of thing. But I have a suspicion that something can go on when all of that is going on. So to get Carlos to calm down, again, Don Juan is like, right, and come get me when you're calm, which is, again, awesome. Like, he gives him a task to calm himself down, and then also gets him to like be still. Like, don't come and get me until you have calmed yourself down. But first he tells him, again, something very practical. Dry your clothes out, wring your clothes out and get dry, because during the night while he was sleeping, he got soaked. And even after all of that craziness goes on, you're still out in the high up in the mountains, where weather can turn one way or the other and you could die. And so he's like, yeah, you're in awe, you're confused, but wring your clothes out and get dry. Gather yourself and then come and talk to me. And I think that's pretty powerful. So again, like, Carlos is acting morosely over it. He's like, he's like problemed by the happening instead of inspired by it, or I guess even curious about it, and asking Don Juan if like the meat was spiked, basically. And Don Juan is telling him again, like, you're missing the point by acting morosely, and that he had to pull it together and understand what was going on and not be in awe, so they could both get off that mountain. And I talked about it before, like when you're in a mountain, when you're in dangerous situations with people who are distracted, that's dangerous. And it's even if they're distracted by their own mind. They may be thinking about some other thing, or, you know, instead of what's in front of them, and they trip and, you know, start sliding off a ledge, maybe take you with them. Who knows, you know? But you have to focus when you're out there in the wild. So then he asks Don Juan asks Carlos how his dreaming has gone, and Carlos says that he hasn't been able to see his hand. He hasn't been able to find his hand in his dreams lately. And I will say that last night I was able to find my hand in my dream, and I was quite satisfied with that, and I still am. I was like next to a garage made of stone, white garage door, and I realized I was dreaming, and I held up my hand, and I stared a little too long, and 2 fingers like disappeared. And then so I looked at the garage door, and then looked back at my hand, and I had 5 fingers again, and then I woke up. But I was able to direct myself to look at my hand and look at my hand. And so Don Juan tells Carlos that he has to get a headband to help with his dreaming, and that it can be from a dream or just from some wild, crazy, unrelated happening. But he has to wait for a vision of his headband and to make a headband, and that will help him with his dreaming. And so Carlos is wondering how a headband, or part of what Don Juan is saying, like your idea for this headband might come from watching some animals, and a hunter watches everything and knows that everything reveals secrets. And Carlos asks, well, how do you know if the secrets that they are revealing to you are true or not? And Don Juan tells him, I've been teaching you all the ways of a warrior, and that's how you know for sure if these secrets being revealed to you are real or not. And mostly it's just Don Juan teaching Carlos to lead an impeccable life, like an honest, true and powerful life. And that's how he will know when he starts actually seeing what's going on in front of him and acting accordingly. He will make the right decisions and know those hunches he will know that those hunches are true. And so I guess I have to give part of it away. During part of Carlos's vision, he sees a bridge. And before he can start to try to cross that bridge, walk across that bridge, Don Juan snatches him up and starts shaking him. And Don Juan says that you don't have the power to cross that bridge. I grabbed you and snatched you out of it because you don't have the power to go across that bridge. And Carlos asked him if he saw the bridge. He said, no, I just saw power, and I know you're not ready to handle that sort of thing, and so I snatched you out of it. And what will happen if a man doesn't have power when he gets on the bridge, Carlos asks him, or when the bridge appears? And Don Juan says, well, for sure one day you will have to cross that bridge, and it'll be up to you what happens. If you have the power, you will cross the bridge. If you don't have the power, that bridge will collapse. And again, that sounds mystical, but that's the same in everyday life. Like, you may have an opportunity, a connection to something may be made, and you will have to step out onto that bridge to bridge that gap between where you are and where you're going. And if you don't have the power to do that, you're gonna fall, and it could be calamitous. You know, Don Juan says you'll fall to your death, and it could be and it is calamitous. Every time you start to make a connection and you start to cross that bridge, and you don't have what it takes to see that through, it's calamitous and you fall. And also, again, I've talked about being an ultra runner. I've had a couple visualizations, hallucinations out there in the wild, and I know other people do too. So it doesn't sound odd to me that a bridge could appear from the fog, or a portal, or elves or donut shops or whatever. Like when you're having a hallucination out in the wild, some pretty wild things can appear to you, mirages. And Don Juan tells him, when you go into these states, you will see things. And Carlos says, well, what do you see? And he says, I see different things because I'm different from you. So different people experience different things and imagine different things in these scenarios. You know, and Carlos just keeps arguing. He refuses to accept that there's nothing in the meat, and that you have to practice power or build power or have power to get power. And Don Juan says, you really are crazy, aren't you? And he knows Carlos is crazy. He says, but I have patience. And I think that's a powerful thing. Like, and you don't have to be around. You can have patience with everyone, but you don't have to have everyone around you. And when you have someone around you, like Carlos is coming around Don Juan knows Carlos is cracked, and yet he has patience with him, and he keeps trying to help him. And I think that's a pretty powerful story. And Don Juan is telling him that a warrior has enough power to stop the world. Again, man, stopping the world. Carlos asks him I guess, how does one stop the world, and when does one stop the world? And you can stop the world anytime you want. And I'm thinking about, like, stop the world, like, people will try to turn this mystical, but it's like slang in a group of people where they have certain things they say. So stop the world is a technique where you relax your vision completely and you let your hearing take over, and you experience the world in a different way, rather than through all the stories and visualizations you get through your eyes. You allow your ears to take over. And again, I've gone into this. You can relax both those things, and you can allow your skin to take over. And so, stopping the world. And when would you do that? Well, if you're in your head visualizing an argument with someone, and an argument that you visualized over and over and over and over again, instead of staring off into the distance and seeing what you would have said and what you would have done, or what they said or what they did back if something happened in the past, you just relax the visions of those things, and you let, say, the sound of the wind be what's going on. And even if you're, say, talking to somebody else, and you begin to daydream and slide away from this person you should be focusing on, you can let that daydream go away and let your hearing take over, and you can hear that person who's talking to you. And that's how you stop the world. And then Carlos asks, why should anyone want to stop the world? And Don Juan can't tell him that. But, like, again, Carlos, and I'm kind of doing it here. I'm like telling you why, I guess, but you're supposed to learn for yourself. Like, if you have something going on in your head that's sapping your energy, or giving you anxiety and tension and depleting your power, you let go of that and you listen to what's going on around you immediately. And that may be a reason that you would stop the world. And so Carlos has gone up into the mountains and experienced this thing with the fog, where he had these fantastic visions, wild, crazy night that he doesn't understand, strenuous. You know, his body's tired, his mind is tired, and he's fearful of fog. And Don Juan tells him that, okay, so you can't leave without thanking the fog for what it's given to you. You can't turn your back on power. And so what he does is he has him go out onto this area and allow the fog to come in and surround Carlos. And Carlos is watching this, and he's talking about how slowly the fog begins to creep in and kind of wrap around everything, and he can see, kind of sense the thickness of the fog. And again, that's not even a mystical thing. Like, if you go and you hang out where some fog comes through. I got the chance years ago with my oldest son to do some renovation on one of the oldest houses in our area. And it was a house that my great-grandfather helped build, and so that's why I took the work. And while we worked there, we stayed there. And from the living room, the dining room, and the kitchen, you can see out into this protected wildlife area. And this herd of elk would come in there. Maybe like 30 elk would be in there. And at night in the winter, and you know, it was just like the scene that Carlos describes. It looks like cut out silhouettes of trees all along the hill, because you know, you have like the purplish blue sky and the dark trees just in the background, and the fog starts to come up over those hills like fingers, like tendrils, and kind of splash down into or onto the prairie and creep across the prairie and wrap around the house. And as it's coming, you get kind of a sense. It doesn't like make sense in your rational mind, but you can kind of sense the thickness of the fog, and it's pretty cool. So now Carlos is facing that. This thick fog is coming down and surrounding him. He can smell it. It's interacting with his body in ways he hasn't felt before. And he's thanking the fog, and Don Juan then directs him to run, and that Don Juan is going to follow him down because he doesn't want Carlos kicking rocks down on top of him. Once again, this has been Coach Brian with Northwest Elite Spirit, and this has been How to Develop Courage from my review from the chapter A Battle of Power from the book Journey to Ixtlan by Carlos Castaneda. Subscribe, like, comment, share, and of course practice. For access to my suggested library, my blog, Northwest Elite Spirit merchandise, and to have me as your personal online coach, go to northwestelitespirit.com. Thank you.